Hello there everyone. Today I want to show you how to make this Elvish inspired wire wrapped pendant. And this is what it looks like. So in this one I'm using some labradorite gemstones. You can always choose to use whatever you want. And even though it's quite delicate, it's still quite strong. So if you want to learn how to make that, then stay tuned. Now these are the things that you're going to need. You'll need 3 beads for this particular pendant. In my case, I'm again using some labradorite gemstones, but you can always choose to use whatever you want. And you need a 6mm bead, one of them, and then you need 2 10mm beads. Again, you can obviously alter the size if you want to make it slightly different, but that's what I'm using. And then you'll need some wires. I'm using a 0.6mm wire, which is a 22 gauge. And that's for my base wire. And then I'm using a 0.25mm wire, which is roughly about a 28 gauge, and that's my wrapping wire. But you can obviously choose different colours as well. This is just what I'm working with. And then you'll need a selection of pliers. Now the first thing you want to do is cut your wires. And I have 2 lengths of my 0.6mm wire. Now mine are about 90 centimeters long. And you're probably not going to use all that, but I always find that it's better to have more, because especially if it's a piece you're working with as you go and you don't quite know maybe how you're going to finish it off, it's better to leave yourself that option of different things you can do. So you need 2 lengths of that, and then I have 1 length of my 0.25 wire, which I'm going to be weaving with, and I've cut that off as well. Normally I prefer to work off the reel, but in this case, because of the way I'm starting the pendant, it wouldn't really matter anyway if I did that or not. So I've cut 1 length of 0.25 off, and I would say probably about 4 meters, 3 to 4 meters. Now it sounds like a lot, and of course it is a lot, but weaving with wire actually takes up a lot more wire than you realise. But also because this is such a fine wire, that takes up even more. And obviously it takes longer to weave with as well. But again, rather more than less, because you could add in if you want to, but it's preferable not to do it really. So to begin with, you want to start off with 1 wire of your 0.6mm, and then you want to get your 0.25mm out as well. And you want to actually find about the middle of both of these wires, because that's where you'll be starting off. So I have roughly the middle, and then what I'm going to do is you basically now need to attach your weaving wire onto this, onto your base wire. So you have the middle of both, because what will happen is with your weaving wire you'll work outward on both sides. That's why it needs to be cut off anyway, because there wouldn't be a point in having one side attached to the rail where you can go endlessly, but the other side has a limit to it anyway. So, and because obviously it's a symmetrical piece, so that's why. And how you attach this wire, the weaving wire, is just wrap it around your base wire, in this case twice, and make sure when you're wrapping it that the coils that you're making on your base wire are nice and tight, so you don't have gaps in between. So basically now your weaving wire is attached to the base wire. So you now need to introduce your other 0.6mm wire. So you grab that, also find about the middle of that, and then, because you have the weaving wire attached to the first 0.6mm wire, and you just want to notice which way your wire is coming. So because of the way I wrap this around, my wire is coming around and up, over, and then coming out. So it's coming over the wire and out. So I need to place my other 0.6mm wire underneath my weaving wire. Because I now want my weaving wire to go over both of these 2 wires, my base wires. So it's placed roughly like this. You have your 2 base wires next to each other, side by side, and then So far your weaving wire is still only attached to the first one with the other one lying right next to it, but then it's coming up, over and then across both your wires. And then what you do now is just repeat what you just did. So wrap your weaving wire around, this time go around both wires, because this is the type of weave that we'll be doing. We're doing 2 wraps each time, but the way we're doing it is we're doing 2 wraps on one wire, 2 wraps on both wires, and then back to 2 wraps on one wire, and then 2 wraps on both wires again. So that's the first wrap go around, and then the second time come back around again, both wires. And then if you look at your piece, your weaving wire is wrapped around one base wire first and then around both. So now you need to go back to wrapping around the first base wire again, and the one where you only wrap around one wire will always be on the same side. For now anyway, but in the section that you're in. So what you need to do is go down in between your wires now and ignore the outer one. Still making sure every time you wrap that your wraps are nice and tight and close together. You can use your nails and your fingers to push them in. So that was once, and then we need to go around again. So down in between your wires, to just do the first wire, and then pull that tight. So you now have 2 wraps around the first wire, 2 wraps around both wires, and then 2 wraps around the first wire again. So we're now back to going around both wires with 2 wraps again. So bring it around both and all the way back around, coming out. That's once, and then one more time, around both, all the way around, and bring it back around, like so. And you'll be able to see that your weave is starting to grow slowly. And then back to doing it around the first wire, so down in between the wires and tighten. And in between the wires again, and pull out to go around the same wire. And make sure that's nice and tight. And back around both, like so. First time. One more time, back around both, and pull it all the way around. So you're back to this side. So that's basically how you do the weave, and that's the same weave that we'll be doing throughout the whole thing. I'm just going to switch places every now and then, but I'll show you that as we go along. So I've now done 3 wraps around the bottom wire on its own, and I've done 3 wraps around both wires together. Now to make specifically the pendant that I did, in total we need 12 of these wraps. And the way I count them is I just count basically the tips, the points where you wrap both wires together. But because at the moment we're working with one side of the weaving wire, what I'm going to do is I make 6 on this side, and then I go back to the middle and work my way outwards on this side. So I need to make another 3 on this side. So I'm now in the place I need to go around the bottom wire on its own. Make that nice and tight, so down in between the wires and bring it back around. Like so. And now it's time again to go around both wires. And again, always doing it twice, remember that. And push it down so it's nice and tight. And then back in between the wires again to go down to the bottom one on its own. And one more time in between. and then back around both. Tighten it every time. Back around both again. Making sure that if you lose count and lose track how many you've done, just count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I just need to do one more. So around the bottom on its own. So in between, back around, and pull it tight. And the last one around both on this side. One more time. You want to be careful when you're weaving with your wire, especially with it being quite such a fine wire like this, that you don't get too many kinks in it, because if you do and you don't get them undone, it will weaken the wire and we can end up actually snapping there. So I've now done 6, so I now need to move back to the other side and just continue on this side. So my wire's in position. Now this one is obviously going the other way because it's the other end, so it's coming up in between, but I've only done one around the bottom one, so I just need to do one more. But this time, because you're basically working from underneath instead of above, and pull it tight, you need to come below both of them to be able to then go back around both, and then pull it around. Like so. So that's one wrap around both, and then go around one more time. But this time you need to come up between the wires. To get into position to go back around just the bottom one on its own. Like so, making sure they're nice and tight every time. And then it's just back around the bottom one again. And then you want to do 6 in this side as well, so you end up with 12 in total. 12 set of wraps really. But just count the ones where you've gone around both wires. That's the easiest way to do it. So continue to that point and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now made 12 sets of wraps in total, and what this is going to be, because like I told you, we'll be working from the center or the bottom really, and then outwards on both sides. So what this part is going to be the very bottom loop that you see down here. So that's what we need to create now. So to do that, I get my round nose pliers out, and then for these ones, you don't want the loop to be too big, because obviously, as you can tell, the loops on it kind of graduate in size as well. So for this one, on my pliers, I went in almost to halfway down, and then kind of place your pliers. You don't want to grab onto your weave, you just want to place them there, and then start bending your base wires with your weave around them. And you do this gently. Take your time. And what you can always do as well is have some flat nose pliers, because the weave automatically kind of wants to bend so it doesn't stay flat. So if you just get your flat nose pliers and help it stay flat while you're bending it. and just gradually get it to bend in the shape you want it to. Flat nose again, making sure it stays flat. And then as you're bending, make sure the two wires on one side goes above the other ones. And then keep bending it until you basically reach your weave, the ends of your weave are pretty much just overlapping at the ends. And then get your flat nose pliers again, making sure it stays nice and flat. So this is just working with it slowly, taking your time. And be gentle with it. And you can always then, when you have the loop and it's got a nice shape, you can always then, without your pliers in it, pull them a little bit, like so. Just till you get the exact size that you want. And then just make sure it's flat before you continue. Like so. So there you basically have the bottom of the pendant. So now that I've created the bottom of my pendant, you can either do this now or you can do it at the end, but I like to just go in and do just a little bit of tweaking now before I continue. So when you'll notice, first off, when you're bending your wires into shape, I like to make sure that the wire where I have all the wraps going around, basically every time you wrap you're using that wire on the inside, which means the ones where you wrapped around both, basically the points are the ones facing outward. But that's just my taste and my opinion, so you can also change that if you want. What you'll find then when you bend it, and you bend it like that, is the tips of your weave, where it wraps around both, it might separate a little bit. So all you just do is you go in and just press them together. You just use your nails. It's very easy to just press them together. So that's just a little bit of detail. Make sure they don't splay out too much. And again, I'll prefer to do that throughout as well, to make sure it stays nice and neat. So now what you need to do is continue your weaves up the side. But like I said, because I want my tips where I've wrapped around both wires to kind of always be on the outside, you have to switch places regarding your weave. So we'll start with one side, so just put the other weaving wire out of the way towards the side where the other wires are going. And currently I'm working then on the ones going over the top. And as you go as well, try and keep your base wires as straight as you can, or if they do bend a bit, then just straighten them back out, because you don't want to weave around the wire if it's out of shape. You want to make sure you straighten it out first. So do that, and then you want to see where your weaving wire is. Now in my case, I'm finished where I'm coming around both wires, and I want to change place now. So if I just continue the way I was, this one would be my bottom wire, which is where I always wrap around, where I wrap around on its own as well. But I want to change that to be this one. So the way you do that is just simply go below both your wires, and then instead of coming up between like you would have to continue, you'll come back around almost as if you were doing another wrap around both, but instead of going around both, you go down in between the two wires. And then pull that tight, nice and tight down to the other ones. And then back around again, because you remember you need to do it twice. like so. So you now have 2 wraps around what on this side is going to be the inner wire again. So that's basically now changed place. And then you're back to again going around both wires. Once. And one more time. Like so. And then again, back around just one. So round and down in between the wires, and then back up. And one more time. Down in between, and back up. And use your fingers and nails and that throughout to make sure you push them down every time. So that's how you then switch which wire that you do your single wrap on. Because then I'll show you on here. That we've done the bottom loop, and we're now going up to the second loop where we have our first bead, and that's the small bead. So what we need to do now is do the right amount of wraps to reach the middle of the bead. Now in my case, I can count them. I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then of course you'll want to do the same on the other side. But it's best to just try it as you go. So you do a few wraps and then see how far you've gotten. Because you want to make sure you reach the middle of your bead, because you need to go through your bead to attach it. And it's better to do too few and then do a little bit extra rather than doing too much. You can undo it and then use it, but as I say, every time you kink and bend the wire, it's going to weaken it a bit. And with it being such a fine wire, you want to be extra careful with it. So just try and measure as you go. So I'm going to keep wrapping up like I just showed you, and do exactly the same on the other side. That's on the back. You can always turn your work around if you need to, or just open them up a little bit as you work. Obviously again you want to change place with your weaving wire here as well, like I just showed you on there. So reach that point and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now weaved further up on both sides and I've reached about the same point. I've made the same amount of wraps, and then what you need to do now is basically double check that this is the right positioning for your bead basically. If you need to do a bit more, then maybe do another wrap or so. If you need to take some off, then do that. That's why ideally if you check throughout. But then what you need to do is get your 6mm bead out and then feed that onto one of your lengths of your weaving wire. And then bring that down, and you can roughly see if you think that's going to fit. Then you need to get your other weaving wire. Now this is going to be a little bit fiddly because your weaving wires are still quite long, but just do it gently so you don't risk kinking it too much. And you want to go through the bead again, but the opposite way. And pull through, do it gently, also so you don't risk damaging the wire or scraping any of the coating off or anything if you're working with coated wire. And like I said, do it gently. If I just kept pulling I would have got a kink, and first of all I wouldn't have gone through the bead, but also it would have damaged the wire and probably broken it. So just do it gently until you've got both your wires through, like so. And before you pull tight, you want to basically gently ease these wires into the right shape. So they need to curve, start curving this way now to basically form a shape around the bead. So you just like keep holding this because you don't want the bottom loop to move. So just hold tight on that and then just start moving these inwards a bit to get like a rounded shape. Just do a little bit at a time. Go to the other side and do the same thing. And then if you need to go back and forth a bit till you reach a point where you think it's going to fit, and then you can go back to laying it down. Have your bead, and then you can pull your two weaving wires a bit tight, and then first of all then you can see if it fits, if it's how you want it to be. And I think that looks pretty good. You can always then ease them a little bit more if you need to, one way or another. Because what you need to do now is have these wires come back around the bead and then cross over at the top again. Like so. So now you've basically made your weaving wire switch side, but there's nothing bad about that, you just continue the same way. Now I will just say what I like to do is the amount of weaves that I've done on the side before reaching the bead. When you reach right at the end, instead of just finishing around, I like to basically stop in the middle of a wrap. So don't do both, just do the one, because then you pull your wires through your bead, and then when they come out on the opposite side you just finish off that wrap. So you're then using the new wire to finish off that wrap. I just think it's a little bit more secure and it makes it look a little bit more uniform. So you're now at this point, and then basically all you need to do is continue with your wrap. So you do one side at a time, and you can always kind of move your wires a bit towards one way or another way to make it a little bit easier to work with. And what I like to do is on this side my weaving wire has come from below and gone through the bead, so I usually like to then go above the weaving wire, above the base wire, sorry, to finish off this wrap. Whereas on the other side it's coming from above and going through the bead, so I'll pull that underneath my base wires and continue my weave. That's just my personal preference, and I think it also makes it a little bit more secure. So I finished off my wrap on this side with doing half of the wrap around both wires, so I now need to come around both again to finish off that one wrap. And then I always just like to do both sides right to begin with before I continue the weave all the way up, just to make sure everything is in place. So like I said, this one I want to come below, so I'm just going to pull this back around and come below my base wires and then around both again to finish off that one wrap. And push it down, all the way down. And then you now see if you're happy with your weave and where your bead is sitting, because then you now want to continue, and you can continue on either side because you'll be doing both anyway. So on both sides I'm back to now wrapping around one wire, and remember I'm still doing it on the inside wire. Oops, just got tangled up then. So when you've just done your bead, just make extra sure that you push it down every time with weaving wire, because where you have your wires crossing inside the bead and coming out, they're a little bit more likely to kind of separate. So just make sure you keep pushing it down. And back around the one wire still. Push it tight and pull it down. Push it down. And then I'm back to wrapping around both. So like I said, you need to do that on both sides until you reach the point where you then ease your wires back in over each other and where they're going to overlap again. So do that and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now weaved further up on both sides, and I think I've reached about the point where they will cross over. So again, what I'm going to do is just get your weaving wires out of the way for a little bit, and you again now need to pull these two weaved wires across each other, just like you did down here at the bottom. And what I like to do is making sure that they cross over the same way, because I think that gives it the nicest look. So every time from this side, I'm going to make it go over the other side. So I grab them both and gently ease them to go around the bead. And basically cage in the bead in a way. Until I feel like it looks how I want it to look. And you can always face it to you and just make sure everything is symmetrical. Like so. So I think that's pretty good. And we're now basically back to, so again you switch side because your wires are crossed over. And you again reach the point where you basically need your weaving wire to switch side as well, to still have your wraps around both wires on the outside. So you just repeat the exact same step as you did down here. So just continue like that, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now weaved up both sides again, the exact same way that we did the first time we looped over each other. And then I'm now in position to add my next bead. And because like I said, the loops going up graduate in size and so do the beads. So this time I'm going to grab one of my 10mm beads, and I've already threaded on to one of my weaving wires, and then again we need to thread on the other side. Make sure you have no kinks or bends in your wire if you can avoid it. So thread that through the opposite way. And pull it all the way through slowly so you don't get any kinks as you go. Like so. And then again, you just want to gently start easing the wires that you weaved onto with your weave, again a bit in a curved shape, to then start forming around this bead. Do it on both sides. Still make sure the weave stays nice and flat like you've been doing throughout. Just do it gently till you think they're roughly in position, and then grab your two weaving wires and pull your bead tight. and then you can see if you're happy with this. Make sure you push your weave down so it's nice and tight, like so. And again, all you do now is exactly what we did with the previous bead. So I stopped in the middle of a weave here like I did down here, and then now you want to continue that weave with the weaving wires that you just threaded through your bead, and you just continue weaving up a bit further until you then need to have your wires cross over again. So get to that point and then I'll show you what to do next. So I've now gotten a little bit further along, and I've finished off this part where I've basically wrapped around the bead and then continued a little bit, because the point that we're getting to now on this one that I've already finished is the point right above this middle bead, where we're going to then go out to the side and make basically one loop on each side. So to do that, we need to continue wrapping further up here so we can then create the loop. But remember that if you still want to follow the pattern where you wrapped around both wires is pointing outward, you want to remember that the point where your wires are going to be crossing, you want to switch over again, just like you were doing the whole time down here. So just get to roughly a point where you think you're going to loop back around and then switch over again. So at the moment I've been wrapping around my two base wires, so the tips of my weaves, basically where I've wrapped around both, are coming out this way. So they're pointing this way because they're pointing outwards, like I made sure they do the whole way. So I've now got to a point where I feel like when I loop back around, this is where my wires are going to cross. So what I'm going to do now is switch, just the same thing that we've been doing. So I've just reached a point where I've wrapped around my one wire twice. So I need to now wrap around both to be able to switch. Remember to always keep your wraps nice and tight. And now I want to start wrapping around the other wire on its own. Like so. Still twice. And then just continue, wrap around both again. And then keep going like this. So now the points of your weave are pointing the opposite way, so when you loop it, it's going to be pointing outwards. And just keep wrapping until you feel like you've reached the point where your weave is going to be long enough to then loop back around. And then I'll show you how we're going to make the actual loop. So I've now continued wrapping a bit more, so just continue to feel like you have a nice length that you can then work with to make into the curve that you want. Because you can always, it doesn't have to be precise, you can continue wrapping once you've made the curve. So to do this, I'm going to get out my round nose pliers again. And for this loop, I'll show you on this one. This loop is a bit bigger than, say, the bottom one we made down here. So basically what we want to do is go further down on the round nose pliers to get a bigger loop. You can obviously decide exactly how big you want the loop to be, but I've gone almost down to the bottom, not quite, but almost. And then again, you just place it here. Don't like squeeze hard on your weave with your pliers, just hold it there gently, and then just work your wires around and you weave. And then I made my weave go underneath the previous one, so you want it to go below the parts that you've already made. And again, as you're turning it, it will kind of want to bend a bit, so just use your flat nose pliers as well to make sure it stays flat. And just keep going gently. And get it into the exact position that you want it to be. You might want yours to look a bit different. Get flat nose pliers again. You can use them to help the shape as well a little bit. But be gentle with using your tools, especially using such fine gauges of wire. But you just manipulate it into the shape that you want. Just take your time, make sure you get the right shape. And as you can see, the weave that I had already made isn't quite meeting up with that yet, but that doesn't matter because we can just continue it. You just want to make enough that you feel that you can actually shape this loop. So when you feel that you roughly have the shape that you want, then obviously you need to do the exact same thing on the other side, just opposite. So you loop, you keep weaving till you feel that you have enough, and then you loop it around. And you want to make sure that you obviously get the same size loop as this side. So just what you can do is just, when you're making the loop, go in on your round nose pliers to check exactly where it was. And then use the same place on your round nose pliers. And then you get that. I'll show you on the finished one. So the first loop, it comes around, and then I have the weave going back underneath. So you bring your wires back underneath your pendant, and on this side you do the same thing. Have it going back around and underneath. And then obviously you want to keep weaving, but then the next place they cross over, I have the one coming from the left cross over the right one. So basically this one goes underneath both of them, and this one comes underneath and then above. So I've now done my loops on both sides, and I've made sure that they're very equal in size and very symmetrical looking. Now if they're not quite, then take your time now to make them symmetrical before you move on too much further, because you won't really be able to. You might then end up ruining the whole shape. So do that now, and then I'll continue the weave up a little bit, and it's they're crossing over each other like I explained. And then now we reach the point where we need to start working on these loops on the side. So you need to keep wrapping up the side, and this line from this loop going up here needs to be straight, and then follow along. So everything looks kind of symmetrical and follows the same lines and that. So you keep wrapping all the way up to where you think that your wires are going to cross again, and then you want to switch over again, because then these loops, you want to make sure that you have your points of your weave on the outside again. So roughly at a point where you think, you know, when you come back around, your wire is going to cross over. And that's the point that I've reached on mine. So I've reached the point where I feel like once I'm making my loops on the sides, this is when my wire is going to come back across. So I need to switch my weave around. So right now I've finished with 2 weaves just around 1 wire. So I need to change which side that's on. So again, I continue making around weaving around both wires at the same time. That's what you always want to do when you switch sides. And then switch over to do single wraps on the opposite wire than before. And back to doing both, and I've now switched them around so that when I make my next loop, my points of the weave is going to be on the outside. So after having switched my weave around, I continued weaving for a bit until I feel like I have enough, or roughly enough, to make my next loop. Now this loop, we're not going to be coming, in the first one we're not going to be coming all the way around and back, because we need to do 2 loops. So basically we just want to do the first half of that loop to begin with. And again, I get out my round nose pliers to do this. And then you want to obviously start your loop roughly where you changed your weave around. And put your flat nose pliers in. And here I'm using it just over halfway down my round nose pliers. And just putting in a curve. And again, flat nose pliers as well, to make sure it stays flat. And just keep curving it till you have the shape that you feel is right. You can use your fingers as well to manipulate it. And as you're working with, say, further up, you can, as you're holding your pendant, sometimes you can then put the other bits a little bit out of shape. But if that happens, just correct it straight away. You know, keep an eye on it. Keep going back to it, making sure everything is the way you want it to be. Make sure this line comes straight up and follows this line, so parallel to that. And then have your loop in here. So now, because that's the top part of this loop, so we now need to change our weave over again. So we have the weave on the outside here, the points of the weave, to then come around and do this very small loop to come back and make the other half of the first loop. So change the weave around again, just like we've been doing the whole time. You just change it around, and then you want to do a few more wraps after you changed it around, to then have enough to make that very small loop. So I've now wrapped a bit further again after having changed the weave around, so we can now make the last loop. And again, I get out my flat nose pliers, and then you just place it in again. And because this is such a small loop, I've used the very tip of the pliers to try and get it as small as I could. And just like before, you just ease it around. Just do it gently. And as you go, use your flat nose pliers as well to make sure it stays flat. And just take your time to get your loops right. Especially like such a small one like this. It's a bit harder to get than some of the other ones. Flatten it out. Do that as you go so you can make sure you can manipulate it the right way. And for this loop, I actually want my wires to come back underneath. So remember to do that as you're looping it, as you're bending your wire. Now we're slowly starting to get there. Just keep working with it. And again, don't worry if you haven't quite made enough of the weave. Just make a decent amount so you can bend it, but then you can always continue it. Flatten it out. And you just make it a little bit smaller. Just try and hold it the best way you can and pull your wires into the position you want them to go. And don't worry too much about bending the ends of your wire. Obviously don't kink it if you can help it, but getting some bends in it, because you can always straighten that back out. The important thing is just to get this bend around to the shape you want. Flatten it again. And then see where you are, see if that's about what you want it to be. And you can always adjust it if you need to. Make sure it's flat as you go, but especially when you feel like you're finished, go over it so it's flat. So that looks roughly about right to me. And then obviously now I need to continue just finishing off the weave around here, and then again when I reach underneath the point where my wires cross over in this loop, I need to change it around again to make the other half of the first loop that we did, to again have the points of your weave be on the outside. So I've now continued my weave after having switched it around when a wire came underneath the first loop, and I now need to get it to a point where I start making the other half of this loop. Now at the moment my wires are coming behind my pendant. I just want to make sure that they're on top, because I need these wires to cross over the other ones when you cross them, not go under. So then what I'm going to do is get my round nose pliers out again, because we now need to finish off this loop. Just get them to a point I probably haven't done the weave quite long enough, but like all the other times, you just continue it once you've made the loop. The most important thing is to get the loop right. So just put your round nose pliers in, in roughly the same place that you put them in before when making this loop, because you want the other half of it to be about the same size. Because you have wires crisscrossing over each other, it might be a little bit more difficult to get them into place, but that's why you just take your time and manipulate it. Make sure you get all the right curves and shapes and everything stays parallel and symmetrical. So that's roughly getting there. And obviously just spend the time you need to spend on getting this how you want it to look. So roughly something like this. And then again, obviously you then continue your weave. And in this case as well, when you cross over here you need to just switch it around. But then when you do this, these wires that you're going to then weave around, again you need to have them come straight up, so they're parallel to this one down here. I'll show you on the one I've already made. Because basically you're making this shape in the middle, so the ones that are opposite each other are parallel to each other. And then obviously You do that and you want to do all the exact same things on the other side. Create these 2 loops on the other side the same way, just obviously mirrored. And again, just take your time, and then what you do as well is, as you're making the loops, when you get to this loop, just double check where in your pliers you used it to make sure you get the same sizes. And then as you go, make sure you adjust everything that you need to adjust while you still can, so everything is in the right place. So finish off that side and then have your weave come back up this side as well, so it goes parallel to this, so you're forming this shape in the middle. So do that and then I'll show you the next step. So I have now finished off both of the sides, and I've had my weaved wires come up, like I said, parallel, so you create this shape in the middle. And this part, try and make it as square as possible so the opposite weaved wires are parallel and all symmetrical. So now we reach this point, and then here where these 2 wires cross over, you need to switch your weave around again, like we've been doing throughout the whole thing. So do that, and then the next step is to continue weaving a bit, but up here we now need to attach the last stone. So all you do is weave a little bit more, make sure all of this is in place so it is how you want it to be. This is where you want to do it now, because once you attach the last stone, that will then kind of put it in place and keep holding it where you put it. So make sure you do that now. You can adjust it a little bit if you need to. Make sure all the crossovers are nice and flat, nothing sticking out or out of shape. So do that and then continue weaving like you've been doing the whole time. So I continue from the part that I reached before, so that's wrapped around both wires twice and back around one again twice. And just continue for a little bit. Just do a few, do a little at a time. Do it on both sides, because you just want to try and make sure you don't go too far. You want to reach the point where you then need your wires to cross through your bead, because so like we did down here. So you can use this as a rough guideline to see how many weaves you did, how many set of weaves to reach the middle of your bead. Make sure everything is tight and pushed down. So just continue to do this until you reach the point where you need to put your bead in. So I've now wrapped a little bit further at both sides, and I've reached the point where I think my stone is going to fit. So I put that on one side, bring it down, and then grab the wire from the other side, your weaving wire, put it back through your bead the opposite way. And pull your wires through gently, slowly, and then make sure everything is where you want it to be, the crossover is at the right place, then hold it down with your fingers and then just start shaping your sides in, round them a bit to fit around your bead. Do a bit at a time, and do the other side. And then when you've done that, pull your bead tight down to see if it's alright and if it fits. You can keep adjusting it if you need to. Like so. Keep making sure, especially with something like this, that you keep pushing your whole weave down, because it can move up your base wires a little bit. So make sure they're all pushed down, and then just check and see if you're happy that this is where you want your bead to sit. And everything else is in place. And if you are, then continue your wrapping just like you did down here. I've done exactly the same thing, that I've stopped in the middle of a wrap, and then the wire that I feed through from the other side is going to finish off that wrap and then continue the wrap here. So on this side I stopped in the middle of the wrap around one wire, so I now need to continue that. Just finish that one up, pull it tight, so that's the one wrap, and then it's back to wrapping around both in this case. Like so. So you've now started the continuous wrap up this side, and before I go too much further, like previously, I like to just go on the other side and just start that one off as well, just to make sure the bead sits exactly where I want it to be. And again, I continue the wrap that I was doing. And this one I stopped wrapping around while I was wrapping around both of them. So I'll finish that one off, push it down, and then it's back to wrapping around the one wire. Like so. So now your bead sits in place, and just make sure everything is pushed down nicely. And just check if you're 100% happy with how this is now, because you don't want to be going too much further if you're not, and then discovering, oh, you should have done something differently. Because if you need to undo anything, you'd rather want to do it now than if you get further up. And then you continue wrapping again, like with this, so it goes up and hooks around the bead to cross back over each other again. So I've now continued weaving up the sides like I said, and I've gotten up quite high. Now before, when we're caging in the bead, when they cross over, we were going to switch sides on where we wrap, but this time we're not going to do that, because we'll cross over and then we're basically going to finish off the pendant. I can show you in this one. So we're going to round them around the bead again, and then cross them over to finish it off, and then we're going to do basically the bail. So you just continue wrapping the same way, and then you want to make sure everything is right, and you hold your weave down, and then you need to feed your weaved wires around your bead to cage it in. And still just continue with your left one crossing over the top of the other one, because that's the pattern we've been doing throughout the whole thing. If you've been doing it the other way around, then just do it the other way around. And just make sure that they have a nice curve to them, and it sits like you want it to sit. Pretty much like this. So they're now crossed over. And then now what we need to do is, this is why you need a bit extra weaving, because now we basically just need to wrap the two weaves around each other. So the way that we do that is simply by continuing to wrap these two weaves around each other, going the same way, so each time the one coming from the left is going over the other one. And you just want to do this slowly, like always, making sure everything goes where you want it to go, in the right places, and everything else stays where it needs to stay. So you kind of put your fingers on the place where you've already crossed them over to make sure that they stay where they are, where you want them to be. And then you just slowly start moving your weaves to cross over each other again. So they're looping around each other like this. And you want to do that one more time. Again, this one goes under, so gently move that way. This one goes over, so you move that the other way. Over. And just do a bit at a time to make sure they go where they need to go and that it stays uniform. Like so. And this way as you go as well. So say if you do the first wrap and you find that your weave isn't that long enough to do the next wrap, you just continue weaving a bit more. But you can do that as you go. And then now we actually want to start forming the bail. So to do that, you're going to need something round and a bit long in the size that you want the bail to be. Now you can use, say, round nose pliers, but obviously because they taper, you do need to kind of be a bit careful about it, or just take your time doing it. I did use these on the first one, but something else you can do, if you have a gizmo, then these come with it, or if you have something else kind of like this, you can just use that. Obviously you can also use like a pen if you want it to be even bigger, but then you just need to make sure that you continue your weave for longer. But I like it not to be too big because I don't want my bail to overpower my pendant. So what you do is you put whatever you're using, in my case this from the gizmo, behind the weave that you crossed over each other several times, and then you bend it back on that. Just do it slowly. And gently. Take a bit at a time as you go, until you're happy. And then what you'll find is from the side you start to make the bail, as you can see, where whatever you want to use, a chain or anything, will go through. And now these two wires are now coming out like this. So all I did with that is, because I've cut off my weaving wire, I've gotten rid of that now because we're done weaving, is you just continue to wrap these around each side. That's one, and obviously just like I say all the time, just keep doing it slowly and gently, making sure everything stays in place, nothing is crossing over each other. Like so. So again, they're now coming out again from this way, but you wrap them around an extra time on the side. You can take that out, and you can see I have my hole going all the way through, which is where your chain or whatever is going to go through. And obviously you want to make sure to not make this too small, because you want something to be able to go through there, whether it's a chain or something. So make it large enough for that. And then really all that's left, you can continue doing something if you want, but all that's really left is to finish off these wires. As you can see, I have quite a bit left on them, so you can make them shorter if you want to from the beginning. But it was just a guideline as into, because you might want to do something else for the bail where you need to use more wire, or you might want to make it a bit bigger. So rather have too much of that wire, because you can always cut it off and use the excess for something else. So basically that's it done. And like I said, we just need to finish these off. And you can do this in different ways. You can do it however you want to do it. But I like to just kind of cross them over on the back. Make sure that your bail holds its shape. So you might want to hold on to it. And cross them over around the back. And what you can always do is just get your, whatever you were using to make the bail, get that out again. You can always keep it in when you're doing this, but just to make sure that you're not making it smaller. So just cross them over on the back and kind of try and tuck them underneath your bail. So that the back also looks nice. You don't have ends sticking out, because you don't want them just to kind of like stick out of the back. Because first of all, it won't look nice. Second of all, it can catch and scratch whoever's wearing it, and you definitely want to avoid that. So they're now kind of crossing over at the back. I'm going to take this out, and then I'm going to get my wire cutters. And basically what I want to try and do is have my ends tucked in underneath the bail. So it might be a little bit hard for you to see, but that's why if you make sure that they're in position, and then you can go in with your wire cutters and cut them off. Like so. So you now have all the excess wire off, and then all there's left to do really is, I will usually always get my flat nose pliers and just make sure the ends are proper tucked in. So this it can be a little bit fiddly, because obviously you want to be careful not to squeeze anything you've made out of position. It's literally just to tuck in the ends. And you can always just check. Put this back in to see if it's kept its shape, which it has. And then make sure, run your fingers over it, and that nothing's sticking out, nothing will catch. Just make sure to tuck in the ends. Like so, and that's the bail finished. And you can put anything through there that you want to, whether it's chain, cord or anything. And that's basically your whole piece finished. And this is the back. The back is also really pretty, which is also always something I try and do, make the back look pretty, especially when it's a pendant. Because obviously if it's hanging on a chain, it can flip around as you're wearing it. So it doesn't hurt to have the back pretty as well. And as you can see, it's pretty strong, because weaved wire normally gets a lot stronger when you actually weave it, but also they cross over and they're kept in place because of the beads and that. So that's the final piece. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.